Well, with that, we'll continue with our panel on biotech in Brazil. And I would like to invite Fred Aslan, CEO of Advanced Medical, board member of Bay Brazil, VP of Venrock, who will be moderating the panel. And then we also have Lisa Rhoads, partner at Easton Capital. And then we have Claudio Joazeiro, professor at Scripps Research Institute. And we also invite Finck, Industrials Director at Solazyme. Obrigada, Fred.
These knives are working okay, but if you prefer to have that, okay. It's fine.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon. I guess this wouldn't be an authentic Brazilian conference if we didn't have at least one of the panels start half-hour late. So we are, we're right on track. So my name is Fred Aslan. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I am Brazilian. I came to the US for college. This was 22 years ago, and I've been here since. I trained as a physician, and most recently, I was an investor with Venrock, looking at biotechnology broadly. And then most recently, I started a company that's Venrock-backed that does commercialization of medical technology in Latin America. And today we have a great panel here with us because we're going to be talking about biotechnology. And those of you that are in biotechnology know that it's a catch-all for anything that has to do with technology and anything that has biology. So this will range from small molecules that are designed to influence the human body, to genetic engineering of drugs in order to treat disease, to even manipulation of plants and other, agricultural products in order to produce more crops or even energy. And we also have a great assortment here of people that are from Brazil, as well as people that are from the US, but that have a very strong tie to Brazil. So what I'll do is I'll first just provide a quick overview of the panelists, and then we will have a couple of short presentations just to give you a feel for the biological sciences on the human treatment side. Then we'll talk a little bit about energy, and then we'll go into a Q&A, and then we'd love to have audience participation. So I guess the first person I'll introduce is Lisa Rhoads. She's a managing director at Easton Capital. So Lisa has been an investor now for a while looking at healthcare broadly in the US and then more recently in Brazil, and I'll let her talk a little bit more about her background. We have Finck, who's the industrial director at Solazyme. Solazyme is a company that is actually very involved in the energy space, so I'll let him explain a little bit more about their activities in Brazil. Claudio is a Brazilian. He came to the US around the same time I did. He has a PhD, and today he's at the Scripps Institute as a professor, but now he's been very active in the creation of a fund to specifically invest in biotechnology in Brazil. And then finally, we have Faoro, who's also Brazilian. He's the global clinical leader for Genentech, the largest biotech company in the world, and he can tell us a little bit about his current experiences at Genentech as well as his perspectives on Brazil. So why don't we start by jumping to Claudio's presentation, and then we'll go. So maybe Claudio could just introduce yourself and then jump to the presentation.
So good afternoon. Thank you, Fred, for the opportunity for the invitation, the opportunity to be present here today. It's going to be a challenge to keep your attention going after eating feijoada, but I'll try. How do I best? I just ask somebody to.
Good question. Maybe we just try the, try the arrow.
Okay, so I'd like to start by making this very simple statement that biopharmaceutical development, which is really the area that I'm most closely involved with, is one area of technology where Brazil has really yet to take a significant step. And this is a problem. It's an enormous problem for many reasons. So for one thing, Brazil, like every developing country, needs to exploit new areas of economic development. We know, based on several examples of biotech clusters throughout this country, in particular San Diego, how significant biotech and high tech can be in sheltering a local economy to outside influences, as happened in our city in the 90s. And that really should be, I believe, as far as vision of a government is concerned, the main reason for being interested in this field. But what's really driving the attention of the federal government in Brazil now towards biotech are the next two aspects. One is that Brazil, of course, has its own unmet needs as far as human health is concerned. And finally, public spending on healthcare has been skyrocketing, largely due to imports of medications and small molecules that can be turned into drugs and so forth. In 2003, our trade deficit that could be attributed to the healthcare sector was about $3 billion. In 2012, that was increased to $10 billion. So that's really catching the attention of people in Brasilia. So how do you address this issue? Some of what I like to do is to use San Diego. I've been in San Diego for 23 years now, and I skipped my background, but I moved here as a graduate student at UC San Diego, and I've worked since then in all major local institutions, Salk Institute, at the Novartis Pharma Genomics Center, and now at Scripps. And what I like to do is to try and extract lessons from these 23 years in San Diego as I witnessed the biotech cluster they're being born and turn into what's today the second or third largest cluster in the world. So what are the factors that led cities like ours in Boston and San Francisco become such clusters? And then how is it that we can try and transplant this, as the ambassador was saying previously, into models that can be brought to other regions around the world. This is a slow process. It takes 10 to 20 years for this to happen in a spontaneous manner. So several places throughout the world, like Singapore and many cities in Europe and so forth, have been trying to stimulate the formation of technology companies through a catalyzed approach in which government plays a significant role in many ways. For example, in helping support the physical infrastructure, in adapting policy and regulation, and of course by investing public capital. And I'm sorry I'm going a little bit fast through this, but I'd like to leave more room for the discussion later. So if you take a look at some of these factors and where Brazil is today, I just wanted to highlight a couple of what I see as really positive aspects and some challenges. As far as favorable elements, what we see is that there is available scientific expertise and capabilities. The government has been very aggressive in stimulating this type of development. Today we have about 10,000 PhDs graduating every year in Brazil. There is a strong public support for innovative biopharmaceutical companies in the form both of cash, but also the Brazilian government has a very strong power in the sense that they are one of the major purchasers of medications in the country from small companies and large companies, so they create stimulus in that manner. And then finally, they help, so there's great infrastructure and necessary skills to support the industry in place. For example, clinical trials in Brazil, I used to work at Novartis, and my colleagues there used to tell me in response to my inquiries that they're very satisfied not only with the rate, but the quality of the medical research that can be done in Brazil. And then finally, there has been also great improvement in the regulatory environment, and here we're talking about IP protection, we're talking about approval of new pharmaceutical entities and so forth. But there's still a long ways to go. A major challenge that I see for biotech clusters to develop in our country is that there are very few private investors with expertise and or focus in the field. And as Fred already mentioned, I'll give now my 20-second pitch. We are raising currently a venture capital fund that's going to be 100% focused in biopharmaceutical development. And we're looking both for public investors in Brazil, but also private investors in Brazil and in the US. Another main challenge is that there is very limited experience in the country in this field. And then finally, there's very little technology transfer from academia. And we see, in our fund, we see that our role is, together with government, will really be to help catalyze some of this and to find creative solutions that, at least temporarily, can make this fund and this cluster going despite the existence of these challenges. So then there's very little innovation in the private sector. We can measure this in a number of ways. If you, particularly in our field, one way to measure innovation is to ask how many clinical trials are happening phase 1 and 2 in particular. We see very little activity coming from small Brazilian companies in that area. And in fact, even from large Brazilian pharmaceutical companies, they are just not investing in that level of innovation. Phase 1 and 2 trials that we see in Brazil, they are sponsored either from foreign entities or from Brazilian hospitals and research institutions. So we think that Brazil in the biopharmaceutical field then presents great investment opportunities. So for one thing, it's an emerging sector. And when you're the first to invest well, the potentials can be very high. There is an interesting market paradigm in that Brazilian pharmaceutical companies, they don't know how to innovate, and they're eager to acquire new products. That's true, in fact, for every major pharma throughout the world, but particularly in Brazil, since they don't have internal R&D capabilities. So your exit strategies for your small biotech companies are right there. And then finally, we have top quality established R&D infrastructure, and this is arguable, but perhaps somewhat reduced product development costs. So thank you for your attention, and I'd like to pass the word back to Fred.
Thanks, Claudio. So this was a very rapid overview of biotechnology specifically for human health. Now we will have a short presentation about how biotechnology is being used for energy from Jad.
Great. Hi, well, while we're bringing up the slides there, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jad Finck. I'm the Director of Business Development at Solazyme, and I'm actually happy to be back at Stanford. I am an alum, mechanical engineering in the 90s, so it's great to be here representing my fairly new company. And I also think it's a neat example of a company that really hits at the heart of Bay, Brazil. It's a company that was founded not too far down the street in Menlo Park in a garage. Sound familiar? But with one of its most important strategic business units and ventures actually happening right now in Brazil. So I'll talk a lot about that as we go forward. Seem to be playing through. It's kind of playing on its own. Yeah, it's on like a slideshow.
Yeah.
All right, can we stop that? See how we do it here. Okay. I think so. So, what is Solazyme? So, Solazyme is a company that's headquartered in South San Francisco, very close to Genentech, right? Surrounded by lots of Genentech buildings. Right at the heart of biotechnology, of course. And we are now actually a public company. We were founded about 10 years ago, or exactly 10 years ago, 2003. Funded through classic venture capital. Ultimately went public in 2011. And we're about 250 employees now. A big IP portfolio. I'll get into that very quickly. But we like to say we use one of the world's smallest molecules to go after some of the world's largest problems. So we make oil, and we make oil from low-cost sugar, and we convert it into renewable oils for food, for fuel, and for life. And as you all know, oil is present in almost every product out there in one form or another, whether it's from petroleum, whether it's from plant oils or animal fats. It's in almost every product in this room, most likely. And so it's really an oil-based society. And in history, it's usually come from one of those three sources. So we like to say Solazyme is now a fourth source of oil with the ability to be in or improve all of these products. So how do we do it? We do it with microalgae, and but we do it with algae in a different way than you may have heard about. We put algae in the dark. Algae have the ability to grow photosynthetically like a plant in the sun, but they're actually much more efficient when you put them in the dark and feed them sugar, like you're feeding yeast sugar to make ethanol. We put algae, proprietary algae, in our similar fermenters, typical stainless steel, regular industrial equipment, no magic there, but the magic's in the bug, and it makes very different types of oils for very different industries. We have customers and products everywhere from anti-aging cosmetics to military jet fuel. I'll show you some examples of that. So we make lots of oil with algae. They're incredibly prolific. We feed them sugar. We feed them sugar from lots of different sources. Right now, we're mostly working with sugar cane and corn. And in the future, we'll work with cellulosics, non-food sugar. And we have markets in fuels, chemicals, nutritionals, foods, and cosmetics. And one of the driving reasons why a lot of us joined the company is the mission that we're not just making new products, we are making them sustainably, and we're here to make a big difference in the world. So this is one example, producing 100,000 metric tons, which is a typical annual production for one of our plants, of our oil versus mineral oil is the equivalent of planting about 10 million trees from a CO2 perspective. This is another product that's a fun one to talk about. A lot of folks might be coming to our offices to talk about fuels or chemicals, and we might give them show them a gift of something that's actually on sale in Sephora right now. So this is our anti-aging cosmetic line. It's called Alginist. Some of you may have even seen it. It's in about 1,400 stores around the world. It's in Asia, Europe, US. This is one example of kind of the diversity of our portfolio. We also have a whole bunch of food products that are commercializing right now. I think you're about to see a lot more algae, very healthy profile food products in the marketplace. Another business, another whole cost structure, and another whole market. And we're quite proud to say that we're also a biofuel company. We had the first commercial flight commercial with actual revenue-paying passengers on advanced biofuel, 2011 with United. We've got partnerships with Volkswagen, and we fueled the U.S. Navy, everything from F-18s to Seahawk helicopters to destroyers with our algae fuel. So very diverse product, and we've done very large-scale programs. Now, this is the heart of the matter. Why Brazil? So this is a slide that gives us a lot of pride right now. For a small company that was funded from venture capital originally and then public markets, we're actually a steel-on-the-ground company. I like to say this is our beyond PowerPoint slide. This is our plant. This is an algae plant. It looks a lot like an ethanol facility because it is typical stainless steel tanks. This will be producing 100,000 metric tons of algae oil, and it'll be done by the end of this year. So it's an exciting time for the company. It's not something that replicates as quickly, obviously, as a web technology or a computer technology. This one needs steel on the ground. So it's been a challenging path to get here, but we've been fortunate through funding. And specifically in Brazil, one of the things that really made this happen is this plant is being financed in a large way by $120 million financing from the Brazilian National Development Bank, BNDES. So we can talk about that in the Q&A, but there's several reasons why we're in Brazil, but that's a very strong one, of course. First-of-a-kind technology, first-of-a-kind plant, and a very large financing at very attractive rates. So just summary, we're creating a whole new class of products, all sustainable, all renewable, either equal or better performance, and we're doing really big partners, and Brazil is a huge part of our strategy. So I think that's my last slide. Again, another slide that gives us pride when we're an industrial biotechnology company, so we actually like to see big rail cars of our oil moving around. This is beyond test tubes. So again, Brazil is, we use sugar in our process. There's a lot of reasons why we're in Brazil. One of them is Brazil is the best in the world at sugar. From a operations standpoint, from a cost of production, from a country vision of what sugar can be, there's no comparison. But also, we're in Brazil because, as we've been talking about probably all day, incredible markets and growing markets. So consumer end markets, very high class production capabilities, and we use sugar in our process, so Brazil is now becoming our most important manufacturing base. So with that, I'll be happy, looking forward to questions, and thanks for your time.
Great, thanks, Chad. So I'd like Leo next to actually give us a quick overview about, again, please start with your background, and then explain a little bit about Genentech's activities in Brazil and your perspective on the relation.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Margarese and the organizers for inviting me. It's been really fun to see this type of activity happening so close to home. So I work at Genentech, which is a subsidiary these days of Roche Pharmaceuticals. So we have a long and rich history in Brazil already. Before that, I came to the US in 2002 to complete my medical training. And I'm trained as a medical oncologist, and came to work at Genentech in 2009 to work on clinical trials and strategy development for drugs against cancer. So right now, my work is on a specific product, Avastin, in the field of breast cancer. Roche has acquired Genentech in 2009. But the fact is that Roche has been in Brazil since 1931. And currently they have over 1,100 employees in Brazil and 3 main facilities. The administrative offices are in São Paulo, and there's a plant in Rio de Janeiro and a distribution center in Goiás. So those are the 3 facilities. We are the second largest pharmaceutical company in sales in Brazil. Our product portfolio is somewhat unique from other pharmaceutical companies in that most of our products are hospital-based products, so nothing that you can go to the pharmacy and purchase, so what we call retail markets. So 70% of our products are hospital. Most of our sales comes really from anti-cancer drugs in the world. Currently, in terms of a percentage, Brazil sales in 2012 was about $1 billion for the entire group, and that's roughly 3% of the global sales for the Roche group. And it continues to grow. In 2012, it grew about 16%. And then now the most recent number is that we grew 11%. So the growth is there, but I think there's a lot more opportunities, and as Claudio mentioned, there is still huge unmet medical need, a huge parcel of the population that is not covered and has access to medicines in Brazil for a variety of diseases.
Great, thank you. So I guess before introducing Lisa, I just wanted to tie a little bit what these diverse sets of conversations lead us to start thinking about. So it's interesting that when you talk about biotechnology, we can talk about Brazil as a market, and we can talk about Brazil as a place for innovation. And it's very clear that most of the activity that has been going on by the very large companies are still focused on Brazil as the market, whether there's a very large consumer market or whether there's, source of sugarcane and a very large market. And so I think the way for us to try to think about this is to first have a conversation about Brazil as a market, and then we can talk about Brazil in terms of innovation, and we can actually tee off, Lisa, with the first question of the panel, which is going to be, when we think first about this initial question about the market, what are the trends that you're seeing in terms of this has been going on for several decades, the notion of Brazil as a market. But what is the latest activity going on, given sort of the rise and then the most recent slowdown? How are you seeing these commercial activities going on? And if you could please introduce yourself
Sure.
first.
Okay. Thanks, Fred. I'm Lisa Rhoads. I'm a managing director with Easton Capital. And Easton is a New York-based, I know, not San Francisco-based or Palo Alto-based venture capital fund. But most of our investments are actually out here, so just had to throw the New York in there. But we do healthcare and healthcare only, and we do it across the board from diagnostics, devices, therapeutics, and healthcare IT. And we're seeing a lot in a lot of diversity of areas. My background is actually a private equity model based in Bermuda, so I have much more of an international approach to investing as opposed to, even though I'm American, my view has always been that healthcare is a global play. It's generally globally developed with many people from all over the world developing products. As you can see, development teams are brought in from a variety of places, but they all have one approach. And that private equity model was really a hybrid where, as opposed to the traditional venture model of just investing in technologies, providing capital, where the private equity side would always give in more of the operation side. So being in the companies, providing operation expertise, as well as providing the capital to do that as well. So venture across the board in the US, and my particular interest in how we got onto here is that I'm looking at Brazil as a market, not only a market for getting product out there, but a market for actually seeing if there's innovation and creating that innovation. You heard the ambassador say that only 0.3% of patents globally are actually developed from Brazil, while it's 3% of global GDP. That's a real issue. That's an issue for Brazil and something that is, we could talk about the innovation side. But answering Fred's question about what I see in the marketplace today is that the market for products that are being developed on a global basis, new molecules going into Brazil, is that there's essentially been a 7 to 10 year lag of getting in innovative products into the marketplace. Much of that has really been due to the fact that the costs are very high to patent and to get regulatory approval in that market. The regulatory environment is a very high bar. Anvisa requires another market, generally on the therapeutic side, having the FDA to approve it prior to having it come into Brazil, and very much like China, has put in another layer to say that you need to do trials with Brazilians in those trials to ensure that we feel that it's safe for our population. That layer of regulatory requirement has pushed back companies, especially smaller biotech companies, from saying, I'm going to go commercialize there. A US company, generally US innovation or European innovation, will think of a product, create the intellectual IP, and even if they put a PCT patent out there, which is your global patent, will say, I'm going to develop it, and my commercial value of the product is the US, Europe, and if we're really crazy, we're going to go to Japan. But they forget the rest of the world, and Brazil is really catching up now on the patenting that has not been done. So many times, a lot of the business development relationships of getting these products into the market, they don't have a patent, so you're trying to fix that, which you cannot do if you haven't done in the past. So the trend is that now you're seeing patents come in because of the patent law that was established in 1996 that has completely changed Brazil's view on patents, and companies looking at that. The big companies that always did it, not the small ones. And then you're also seeing a pricing pressure. And right now, the local Brazilian pharma companies are very focused in, they made a lot of money in generics. Generics has been very, very good to them. There's an incredible price war. And the introduction of the Generics Act, which means that they now have to manufacture at a global quality, has put a lot of pressure on them, and everybody's playing the price game, and now all of a sudden they're scrambling and saying, I've got to have innovative product. So this is the dynamic that I'm seeing mostly right now. High bar for regulatory approval. Anvisa very focused in on trying to meet the requirements of the Generic Act, and companies in Brazil looking for that innovation and trying to in-license it.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So now I'll just start asking each of you just some pointed, directed questions. So maybe I'll start with you, Jad. Quick question. When you guys were thinking about building the manufacturing facility in Brazil, you were obviously thinking about the Brazilian market probably as being one of the first places, maybe not, where you would go with your final product. Was that a challenging thing to present to investors in the US, given most of your investors were in the US?
I think
In our case, no, because of the nature of our technology, where we are a fermentation-based technology. So sugar is our most important raw material. It's the biggest part of our cost. Feedstock and biofuels, biochemicals is paramount. And so I think the investors knew that we would be going to Brazil at some point. The question was telling the story about, for a small company, to go down there and try to, would you have gone immediately to Brazil as a small company, or would you have tried to do something a lot simpler, closer to home? I think they knew we had to go there, but we had to tell the story of how we do it successfully. It wasn't a question of why are you going there. It's how are you going to do it right. I can't say that was easy or there's some magic way to do it, but that for certain technologies where that's a highly strategic place to be, the challenge for us was saying at what point in our fundraising trajectory, our proof of technology trajectory, and our market uptake trajectory, does it make sense to get in there? And then also from a regulatory standpoint, that also had a huge effect on our timeline of, well, maybe we're not ready to be down there, maybe we'd rather let it cook a little bit longer, but by the way, your regulatory timeline has to start now or you can't sell in X years. So that goes right up to the executive boardroom pretty fast. Decisions get made fast when there's incompressible timelines on regulatory of your most important country. Mm-hmm. So.
And thank you. And then perhaps sticking to the regulatory and commercial aspects of things, I'm curious, from Roche's perspective, how long does it take from when therapies are actually approved in the U.S. to when they are commercialized in Brazil? How long does it take, and how much of an emphasis is it?
Yeah, well, there's a lag, as Lisa mentioned. Right now, we probably have anywhere from 2 to 3 years for our newest products. I agree with what Claudio mentioned also, that the timelines and also the regulatory environment has gotten better, but it still has a long way to go. I can give you one example of a clinical study, a global clinical study that I'm leading, that we really wanted, including myself as a Brazilian, I would be very proud to have my study being done in my own country. But we had all these countries that we're going to, and the only country that we couldn't activate was Brazil, because by the time we finished all the regulatory applications and all the documentation, it took 15 to 17 months just to be able to open the clinical trial sites in Brazil. By that time, sites would be open for only 1 month and then closed because the study was fully accrued. So it made no sense to do that anymore. So that's kind of what plays these days. Yes, it's attractive from a marketing perspective, but also, as Claudio mentioned, I think there's a high quality that is observed in the clinical studies that are conducted in Brazil. And there is interest from companies, and in Roche for sure, of going there with our global clinical trials and doing clinical research in Brazil. But unfortunately, it's still very difficult for a variety of reasons, and regulatory being one of them. And certainly, I think more improvement is expected. I think there are many things that have gotten much better, but Brazil has its specific particularities that, just like every other country, Japan made us take all the labels off our vials because they had to visually inspect each vial visually before they would let them into the country because of particulates. So these are just, particularities with each country, and I think Brazil is getting there, but it's not quite there yet, unfortunately.
Okay, great. And then Claudio, yeah, I was going to, we'll go ahead.
So I'd like just to follow up on Leonardo's comment, but I think it's also important to make a distinction then between foreign entities that plan to carry out clinical trial in Brazil as compared to, from my side, our interest, from a small biotech company in Brazil who wants to do that same type of study. And the results of our interviews with several CROs in the country are that there is a difference. One is an additional layer of regulatory burden just from the fact coming from outside. But apparently there is also differential treatment on whether you are foreign or domestic. And I think we all acknowledge there is still some level of xenophobia in our society, particularly at the public level.
Is this because of the much larger funding that's coming in from the international companies as compared to the local Brazilian companies? Or is it something more?
Well, so the studies coming from abroad, they are subject to an extra layer of regulatory requirements. Okay, so that's regardless of how many there are. It's possible there's just there's also a numbers game underlying that, but there is talk that there is also favoritism going on towards national entities.
There is that. There are two sort of big associations. One where the multinationals are in, and one where the locals are in. And the extra, I've experienced that extra layer of scrutiny with the multinationals. But the strange part about it is that the true going through on visa and getting things through on visa, the multinationals have a much better chance of doing it. The local companies don't. So Anvisa is trying to support that network of innovation, and they're trying to do it through the regulatory bar, but they can't even do that with that because it's just they don't have the same level of understanding about the development process. Because development, science of identifying a molecule is one thing, it's science. Drug development is an art. And that's something that it's hard to articulate to a regulatory group. But that's what I see down there.
And then, well, so perhaps building on this point, I think BNDES came up a number of times as being an institution that is very eager to invest in innovation, and they have actually made some significant investments. But do you see this favoritism also happening in terms of favoring international companies that are trying to build plants and to do things in Brazil rather than actual Brazilian companies?
I'll say, Chad, that you did a great job there. They are actually desperately needing infrastructure. And I think you hear the term infrastructure across every single sector in Brazil, desperate need for infrastructure, yet the real bias of having it done locally. There's the Petrobras story about I need to, to commercialize this amazing oil find, the Santos oil find, yet it's deep water. And there are only 2 companies in the entire world that make deep water rigs. But let's not play with them because they're not Brazilian. Let's teach a Brazilian how to do that. I know I came from Bermuda, it was the same thing. Let's go teach an open heart surgeon to be Bermudian. And I'm like, no, I want my open heart surgeon now doing 10,000 procedures. And there's a great story, I don't know if anybody's read the book called Breakout Nations, where an investment banker analyst who's gone through all the different nations and analyzes which ones are going to become the better ones. And the story is the Chinese man who's come into the Brazilian bank and talks about how we're doing business here, but you've got to change your infrastructure. And the Brazilian banker looks at him and says, well, you don't understand. We have to talk about profitability of our infrastructure investment. And the Chinese man said, well, why? Doesn't government just pay for it? And this is the problem here. Government doesn't pay for the infrastructure, so the basic infrastructure isn't there. And so you have very few CROs, you don't have biologics manufacturing anywhere. Manufacturing should be developed there. That's what BNDES is for, yet they don't have the expertise to do it locally, and they are against the internationals from doing it. So some kind of partnership would be the ideal way of doing it.
Yeah, I'm curious on Claudio, your perspective on this, because it seems like when you talk to entrepreneurs in Brazil who are working in biotechnology, their biggest complaint is, I have a ton of great ideas, but BNDES won't fund me. And when you talk to BNDES, they're like, we have a ton of money, but we can't actually find good projects to fund. So what breaks the cycle? I mean, now that you're thinking about starting a fund, how do you think about places where you can try to maybe close the gap or work with BNDES to try to make this work?
Yeah, I think public capital is plentiful in Brazil today, but they are struggling exactly with this issue of how can we select the projects that are the most likely to win. Without having that hands-on expertise that the typical U.S. venture capital does, right? And so that's in our opinion, and that's exactly the reason why we're putting so much effort in getting this started in Brazil. One of the major infrastructure aspects in the Brazilian biopharmaceutical R&D production is at the level of private capital. We can take any of these major cities that I referred to earlier, and if you go down to the early days, without private capital, that's smart capital. So what we're talking about is money that's not just handed to an investor and then let the investor do whatever he or she wants, entrepreneur. We're talking about money that coming from a group of individuals that have worked in a pharma company before or that have started their own biotech company before and that know how to make the day-to-day decisions at the operational level. And that will know when to stop a project or redirect a project when necessary. And it's exactly at this level of expertise that we are desperately lagging behind.
Great. So why don't we take this opportunity to just open up to see what questions the audience has for the panelists. We'll start over there.
Thank you. My name is Jair Siqueira Neto. I'm a Brazilian scientist working at UCSF in tropical disease. So we are talking about Brazil as a market and as a source of innovation. So Claudio mentioned about this round of investment. So I want to see from the perspective of a VC, for example, from the Bay Area, what would be the advantages to invest in a biotech in Brazil opposed to a biotech here, taking into consideration, for example, the Brazilian cost that we discussed here in the morning. So just to give an example, if I need to get a reagent here, I can get it the next day and it has a X cost. If I have to do it in Brazil, it would take 3-4 weeks and it would cost 4 times more. So just from the economic perspective, what would be the advantages for the investor to put money in Brazil?
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to hear first from Claudio, then we'll hear from Lisa.
Yeah, so you really have, I think you really have to assess at what stage of development you want to put your money in. I wouldn't invest in a biotech company in Brazil that's at the discovery stage, at the laboratory stage, or even at the preclinical stage. On the other hand, if you think about investments at the clinical trials, phase 1, 2, or 3 levels, it's, as I mentioned, it's arguable, but I think costs can still be lower or just if not the same. But at the same time, it's very appealing then that those companies that we form will have strong support with public money that's undilutive. Okay, so I think that's a major attraction right now, at least in this current Brazilian economy.
I agree with the non-dilutive part. I think, first of all, VC looks at investment not just on the technology, but on the team, on the ability to execute. And the cost of development, while you talk about the reagents and the time it takes to get something in there, I mean, I can tell you that Butantan's head of biologics division had to actually smuggle in some of her materials, raw materials, to make monoclonal antibodies, just to become the only one in the country to do it in the first time. So those are degrees of difficulty that you have to do. But what I would say is I would invest in somebody who knows what they're doing, how to develop, and has a great thesis. The additional cost of what you're saying is probably mitigated by what you just heard Claudio say, which is that there is non-dilutive funding from the government. The question becomes, can the team deliver upon it? And it's team expertise. And as I said before, drug development is truly an art form. So if I didn't think that the team in Brazil had the ability to develop it, then I wouldn't do the investment regardless. The cost wouldn't be the difference. So that would be the bar that I would look at.
And then I guess the other perspective on your question is the fact that you guys did choose Brazil out of all the places you could have gone.
Right.
So you could have done it here in the US, but as investors thinking about where to build it, you chose to do it in Brazil.
Yeah, I mean, in actuality, we're doing it in both. So we've got a plant in the US that's going to come online at the same time as the plant in Brazil. But I think for a company our size and knowing the cost these days, financial, time, regulatory, the challenges of even down to not having a bilateral tax treaty between the U.S. and Brazil, and not having, if we're talking Silicon Valley, not having a big understanding or acceptance of stock options being a huge part of compensation. That directly affects recruiting. So there's very fundamental things that would probably change your small company decision if we didn't have sugar being a big part of our process. Now, the nice part is, long-term strategic-wise, it's great to be in Brazil for a lot of the reasons we're talking about, but the timing would probably be different if we didn't have this kind of process, because it was the amount of, the startup costs of Brazil relative to South San Francisco are dramatically different. Now, in the long run, the efficiency and of the sugar production in Brazil, the world-class operations, and then the growing, emerging consumer marketplace is going to be huge advantages for us. But very initially, it's challenging. So we're kind of coming out of that to where our plan will be up and running. But as a small company, bottom line is it's challenging.
And just to get a second opinion on something that Claudio said, given that your expertise is clinical trials, if you had to bet on a clinical trial, if you had to conduct a clinical trial, would you rather do it here in the US or would you rather do it in Brazil? And you can pick the therapeutic area.
Well, I think all things being equal, if I didn't have all the regulatory hurdles that we have to jump through, it probably is cheaper and faster to do it in Brazil. So you can see many companies, multinational companies, going to, for example, Eastern Europe and places like that, some places in Asia, to conduct these studies, because it's, it's cheaper, it's faster, it's easier to get this. So Brazil, yeah, I would love to see more clinical research happen in Brazil, and I think it will happen, because there is demand, the investigators are good, the quality of data that they generate are good. And so I think there's a bright future ahead.
So other questions?
Thank you. My name is Luis Cascão. I work with DuPont Biotechnology here in Palo Alto. This is a question for the whole panel. Perhaps we'll pick Jad's interest a bit more. It's on industrial biotechnology. We see that our colleagues in the petroleum industry, there's a lot of progress has been made lowering the cost of carbon here in the U.S. with natural gas, shale oil, these types of advances, specifically in Brazil with the pre-salt layers, pré-sal. How do you see today, how would the panel see today, trying to make renewable chemicals, biofuels, still in Brazil, compared to maybe when the business case was made? Even if the cost of sugar there is still pretty cheap, but knowing that petroleum is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, no, great question. Something we wrestle with all the time. So I think it's a question of timing and a question of scale. And as I hopefully showed in the strategy of our company, certainly going from the startup in the garage in Menlo Park, and then small laboratories, pilot plants, demo plants, and now ultimately in the industrial side, commercial scale, our cost structure has been coming down dramatically. And you have to build more plants, you have to squeeze out capacity creep, everything else to get down. So it's a question of how do you get there? Certainly, how do you get VCs to invest when they see that long timeline? And then how do you get public markets to stay happy as you're still ramping? It doesn't multiply overnight like a really nice web-based product. For us, it was about showing, do you just have a moonshot? Are you just trying to be renewable and go all the way up? And the only way you can win is to be a renewable fuel going gallon for gallon against petroleum. If that's your only chance to make money, that's a scary proposition, because that's a long path and it's expensive. If you can do it with booster rockets along the way, we feel like that's the only way to do it. So what I would describe our status is having fired off some booster rockets with many more left, ultimately to get to where, and our booster rockets, what I'm talking about is other markets that you can launch with costs that don't matter quite as much. So something, cosmetics, of course, really high margin, not very big volume compared to the rest of our industrials. But that can launch without even a plant. You can toll that somewhere, and that's what we did. And so that shows that we can launch this, and it starts proving our thesis that there's different products along our path as we keep getting our costs down. And now with these big plants in Brazil, that's the first time it'll really be industrial scale, really the first industrial, non-food product, non-specialty product, algal oil plants in the world. that's where we begin to see dramatic cost reductions. And ultimately, we do expect to compete with petroleum, but it's in the early days, it's much more about going after higher value chemicals and then going after volume as you continue to get a bigger footprint. But trying to go straight against petroleum, I come from the oil and gas industry, so I worked at Chevron prior to Solazyme, and that's a really challenging strategy, and I think a lot of folks, if they've come close to that, have struggled. So for us, that's definitely what motivates a lot of people, is we absolutely want to be in your gas tank, but we know you need to partner to get there, and we know you need an enormous manufacturing footprint and the ability to withstand some big things like shale gas and price dropping, and so you need a really robust strategy that's not a moonshot on, I've got a VC funded company that's just going to beat big oil next year. So that's my little editorial right there.
Other, yep.
That I'm a researcher for a corporate governance company, and I specialize in our Latin American markets, and I see a lot of companies seeking shareholder approval for funding and involvement with BNDES, and I'm kind of new to this. I see it much more, especially for construction projects as well as the biotech industry. So I was wondering if Jad or anybody else could jump in and kind of explain what the role of BNDES and how that would affect maybe the bio industry or for other sorts of companies.
Yeah, well, so we were fortunate, as I mentioned, to land one of the big new projects in this area. I think the role for BNDES in this particular case, they launched a specific program called PAIS that was essentially innovation in sugarcane, PAISS, I think. And you know, the point of it makes sense. They're going after a nationally important industry and looking for innovation in something that they have a unique advantage in. So rather than just, there was plenty of funding and continues to be for improving the base business of sugar and ethanol, but there was also large targeted programs to new higher value products. How can Brazil move beyond raw materials in the sugar phase into exporting high-end cosmetics, jet fuel, transformer fluids. So all from sugarcane, all from renewable sources. So in that sense, the role of BNDES, I think, was to be a pretty aggressive backer of something that a traditional bank isn't set up to fund in that sense. A very high capital, first of a kind plant. So project financing for something that initial, it really took the kind of aggressive nature of BNDES to target something that's important for Brazil. So for us, yeah, it was certainly no guarantee, but it was something that was in our sights from the beginning. And again, there are many factors led to us wanting to make Brazil an early important strategic country, and the prospect, even just the prospect of BNDES funding, both for plants, and then there's also plenty of programs for grants for innovation. All of that factored in and said we've got to be there.
There's actually two roles of BNDES. There's BNDES for debt, and then there's BNDES par for equity. Most of the companies you're probably talking about that have to negotiate with BNDES are BNDES par. So a number of the biotech companies, and I've been involved with looking at a couple deals, they can really hold you up. They take an equity position. They're usually 25 to 30% of the company, and they have to approve the next investor or the acquirer. They tend to, like BNDES and Anvisa, want to sell to a Brazilian company. So it limits the exit opportunity for them. On the debt side of it, it's BNDES as debt is the perfect alternative because it was so much less expensive cost of capital than the capital that you could get as debt in the normal markets. So it was the only game in town. If you were going to do something and you wanted to have any kind of profitability, it was the only opportunity you had. And so BNDES, as you said, would develop, if they thought something was right, then they would develop a particular program, they would send it out for tender, and then you would win because you were the one that they already pre-assigned to do. So there are a couple different structures that way. So know which one you're playing with. Equity, debt, and understand that there's a proclivity to want to sell to Brazilian.
So unfortunately, we're going to have to bring this to a wrap, but we're going to be around, so please feel free to approach the panel. I wanted to thank Margarida once again for putting this together, and thank the panelists for being part of the conference.
Good to go.